This is episode 47 with Gary Genetti.
Welcome to Men of Abundance, the podcast for those looking to level up their lives by hanging out with some of the greatest leaders and established professionals in our community, living a life of integrity, honor, and the abundance mentality. Prepare to pay it forward with your host, former Army medic turned lifestyle entrepreneur, Wally Carmichael.
Hey, Men of Abundance, this is kind of a long conversation today, but well worth the listen, in my opinion. I'm pretty sure you're going to think so as well, and you're definitely going to want to share this one. I just want to mention something really quick that I'm working on before I bring our featured guest out. And that is, I've noticed a few people have been asking more and more questions about podcasting and if it would be good for their business or their book or just their message in general. And I've been fielding some of these questions. Well, here's what I've decided to do. I have decided to personally coach and mentor 5 future podcast hosts that may be one of you, or it may be somebody else that you know. So share this episode with others so that they can hear this quick message. Now here's the deal. I seriously am only going to take on 5 people. This is not a scarcity type of thing. It's just because of my time. I have a pretty good idea of how much time it's going to take to personally mentor and hold 5 people accountable to their podcast and get their podcast launched in just 3 months or less. I know it can be done because I did it. Even though I had a mentor, he was not a one-on-one mentor because John Lee Dumas doesn't do one-on-one mentorship programs anymore. And when he did, he charged $10,000 a month for the mentorship. I am not going to be charging anywhere near that at all whatsoever. This program is going to be done very informal. I'm going to be working directly with 5 individuals starting their podcast from concept to what structure will be best for your particular industry and your message and what your niche is. We're going to niche down exactly who your audience is. We're going to decide what software would be best for you based on the equipment that you already have, and then determine how quickly you want to grow your podcast and your business. Will help us decide which software you need to use. I'll make suggestions for all of that, the whole bit, everything. I'm going to be working with you one-on-one. So if you're at all interested or considering starting a podcast, send me an email to wally@menofabundance.com. This is very important. In the subject line, put podcast coach. I'll then reply back to you so that we can set up a 10 to 15 minute Skype call so that we can determine if you're the right candidate to be one of the 5 that I'm going to coach and mentor to start your podcast, get it up and running, full blown, in 3 months or less. Now, be abundant in your life today and share this episode with everybody that you know so they can hear this amazing conversation. Our featured guest today is Gary Genetti. Gary has been designing and making glass for over 38 years. I find this very fascinating. I've always been very fascinated with glass makers and glass blowers and the fine arts. It's just amazing stuff. But Gary has taken it to the next level. And I will have Gary's full bio in the show notes of this show at menofabundance.com/047. But the really cool thing about Gary, the reason why I had him on the show, aside of his story, is one of the things that he's doing is in 2013, he branched out into a world of recycled, or what he refers to as upcycled glass, with his junkyard glass project. It initiated by a trip to a local auto junkyard to assist his 2 daughters on a school project. Then the idea was born to recycle broken car windows into beautiful products. From that, he made a video, launched a campaign on Kickstarter, and raised over $10,000 to develop the small social and environmentally responsible business. This is what I like about Gary's business. This is what I like about what Gary's doing because, as you know, I love for-purpose businesses. I love businesses that have anything to do with helping out the environment and being environmentally responsible. And I really like Gary's backstory, and he's just a really cool guy. Gary, welcome to Men of Abundance.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, me too.
Good to share some time so far away,
It is. Where are you at in the world?
New York.
Upstate
New York. And we're in the beginnings of fall and near the end of the day here. So,
okay.
But good time to sit down and chat, and talk a little bit.
How did we get in contact?
Oh, through Hans.
Oh, Hans.
Hans Hageman. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
right,
He's
Hans.
a new friend of mine, but he's a neighbor. He lives right around the corner from me. He and his wife and family just moved out here, and I got to know him through. We do a studio sale out of my studios in the backyard of the house here, and he came by during one of our open studios, introduced himself, says, I'm just looking for something to do locally, getting to know people, and it's a really good energy guy, and I'm happy to be a friend of his and working with him a little bit, and he's helping me a bit to broaden out my perspective on the world.
Yeah, he's a great guy, and he will certainly broaden your perspective. He is he is a ball of energy for sure, and a very abundant leader in my mind.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you, 100%.
Excellent.
So he turned me on to the whole idea of a podcast. This is my first one, so I've never really done this kind of thing before, and it's kind of fun to have a space to say something. I live out in the country, and I have my friends, and I used to be traveling all over the country, and most of my social group was colleagues were from all over the country, and we'd get together doing shows, and they were kind of like gatherings and parties and our business at the same time. But the last few years I've cut back on traveling, and for a variety of reasons, and just sort of trying to transition into a new way of presenting what I do to the public, and thus I'm speaking with Wally. So.
And I appreciate. I'm honored to be the first one that you get on. That's just amazing. And podcasting is by far. I think the estimates look at about 30% of the population even know what a podcast is, let alone listen to them. And
yeah. Oh, it's growing now. I really think it's going to be the future for.
Oh, absolutely.
The way people talk to each other, and it has such integrity to use the technology for something like this. I mean, because it just couldn't happen any other way. But there's just so much other stuff out there that people are doing on the internet that it's daunting. But to have a nice personal conversation in depth with somebody like this is a wonderful thing.
It is. It's definitely refreshing. Just chatting online, and type and stuff like that. It's so much easier to get our message out. And, you look at the old school, you look at radio, you look at print as far as companies trying to get their message out. And quite frankly, everybody wants to hear stories these days. And always, It's always been the case. Stories always are the best way to go. People love stories. This is by far the best way to get it out there, just to have an honest conversation. So I like to start out every show basically the way I start out every morning, which is with an attitude of gratitude. So what do you have to be grateful for today, Gary?
Well, I am grateful to be here. And, I thought about this. The word gratitude is a very interesting thing to me because it has such depth. And it's one of these what I call state-dependent words, where when I'm suffering, then I'm searching for gratitude. But when I'm in a positive state, it surrounds me, it embraces me in everything that I do. And that's a wonderful thing. And I've really strived for that in my life, to move beyond just the superficial. So, of course, I'm grateful for my family and my friends and everybody that puts up with me. But at the same time, there's this, just to tell one quick story about a moment of gratitude that I'm reminded of every day when in the mornings for myself. And that I went through a very serious surgery, open heart surgery, in 2009. As anybody that hasn't had that experience, it can be it's a major surgery. But when you wake up, you're intubated still. You still have the breathing mechanism down your throat, and your hands are like restrained so you don't get up and take it out. And I was very discomforted by that, and it didn't feel like I was getting enough oxygen. And I kept saying, take it out, take it out. But finally the doctor in the ICU took it out. And I'll tell you, that breath that I took, that was gratitude. It was like a baptism. for me. And I really, since then, I've had a very acute sense of my breathing, and I come back to it during the day, and it really is connected with this feeling of this attitude of gratitude, just like you say. It can grow out of these small moments that can have great significance in life.
Yeah, absolutely. That is definitely a significant emotional event. And I like what you brought up about gratitude, and you ask for gratitude in the hard times, but you also are thankful for gratitude in the good times.
Mm-hmm.
And it's extremely important, absolutely, without a doubt. So before we got started here, I gave a very brief bio and talked a little bit about you, Gary, but I would like to hear it from you a little bit more about a brief background of who you are, what you're doing, and we're going to eventually get into that kick in the gut moment, and the enough is enough moment. But
well, that's just one of them.
Exactly. Yeah. I was figuring so based on our previous conversation. So
right.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get a little bit personal. Let's hear a little bit more about who Gary is.
Well, I have had a career, a really wonderful opportunity to have a career where I have been an independent glass maker for almost 40 years now. And I kind of stumbled into it right after college. I grew up in Wisconsin and came out east right after college to visit some friends out here, and ended up doing construction work with this guy that was just learning how to do glass making and glass blowing. And so he knew a little bit more than I did, and he needed help, so we would work in the construction business during the day, house building, and then at night we'd go practice glass blowing. And we worked together, finally did some shows, and this was 1976, so 76, 77. And he quit shortly thereafter and left me hanging with everything, and I just took off with it and never looked back. It was a time in the craft world where there was very few people doing that kind of work, hand making glass, and in a kind of a garage style. People had figured it should belongs in a factory, and that's where it was in most of the world. But there was a few kind of crazy artist types, like myself at that time, at my age, where, well, let's do this, let's pick it up, see where I go with it. And I was running out of money, and my father had passed away when I was 20, and he was a veteran of World War II, and he died of a service-connected death at the age of 49. So I had gone through my second half of college with the GI Bill, and then still had some money left. I discovered that the VA had a apprenticeship program for a part of the GI Bill, and I found this, looked him up, and this Vietnam vet came out. Just a very impressive man. In the sense, I was working in this kind of shell of a garage at that time. No windows, no doors, just plywood and a roof. And he just so non-judgmental about what I was doing. I was very impressed by that. And he said, I just want you to get what you want out of this. And so Patrick was still working with me at the time, and for a year we had an apprenticeship, and I got some money to keep going with it. And I never looked back. Began traveling the country, selling my work and doing wholesale, learning as I went along, because I had never studied glass making at all. And was part of a movement, a real movement in the country for the American craft movement, which was a revival of the hand making of decorative items, some in the gift world, and then bridging over into the art world, which is where I went with it eventually. And then things changed. I did that for like almost 30 years, I guess, 25, 30 years, and kind of living the dream in many ways. Got married, and my wife and I adopted 2 girls from China, and traveled to China several times for that. And then, so we had a family here, and then I was able to make a living, a modest living, doing what I love to do. I mean, what gets better than that?
Exactly. I completely agree, and that's very I've seen your work, and I've seen the pieces that you've done that are on the site, and I'm gonna, if you don't mind,
I have a
I'm
website. You can publicize it if you.
Oh, absolutely. I will certainly have that website in the show notes of this show. And in addition to that, if you don't mind, I would like to highlight some of your pieces on the show as well, on the show notes, without a doubt. Or if you have any favorites, then send them to me, and I'll make sure they get on there. But the website will certainly be in there. I'm easily amused. There's no doubt about it. But one thing I have always been so intrigued in is glass blowing and the whole art of working with glass. But the thing that really intrigued me about what you were doing is you have, let me make sure I get the term right, upcycled glass. Is that right?
Yeah, that's my recent project. Is upcycling a waste material, which is broken tempered glass. So instead of recycling glass, which is interpreted as just taking broken beer bottles or wine bottles and then melting them down and making more beer bottles and wine bottles out of them. This is actually an upcycling. So I take broken glass and I make beautiful objects out of it. And I've spent the last year or so developing products. My family and I did a Kickstarter to generate some funds to develop products, and we were successful, and it was a great thing. We call it junkyard glass because that's where it was born.
Mm-hmm. So is that where you get the glass from?
Some of it comes as auto glass. Some of it I have sourced within 5 miles of my home, which gives me great courage to contract to sell this kind of work, because I've sourced over a ton of it just within 5 miles of my home.
Wow.
Broken auto glass, commercial shelving. One lady nearby has crates full of it that she got from a Brooklyn construction site. It was brand new, but tempered glass, once it's tempered, cannot be altered. If you try to alter it, it just shatters. It breaks into little pieces. So she's been in her barn. She has crates full of this 2 by 4 foot sheets of this tempered glass that they gave away. They were going to have to pay to have it hauled away to the landfill. But she said, I'll take it. We'll do something with it. And then she heard about what I was doing and came over and said, I got a whole bunch of it for you. Just come over and get it whenever you need some. So there's a lot of more and more uses for tempered glass because of its safety features and the way it breaks.
Kind of a fun fact about me is that's one of my first jobs. Is I worked in not a glass factory. We built windows, so the glass already came to us mostly cut. We dealt with a lot of crystal glass as well, so you could cut the crystal, but obviously you couldn't cut the tempered. But that stuff is heavy, especially when it's double paned in a 6 by 5 window. That's right. It's
it's heavy, and that's what it's costly to throw into the earth, in many ways. Not just it's not toxic. That's one advantage glass has. It's not a toxic material. Some of the raw material, the ingredients that go into it initially are toxic, but they're all fused together. It doesn't. It has this amazing ability to maintain itself in a very inert way. In general product, the raw materials don't leach out of it like some other, like plastics, can give off outgassing and things like that when they're disturbed. But glass itself, even when it's remelted, gives off very little toxic material. But it's just the weight issue and the fact that so much energy goes into making it that it really is a waste to have to throw it into the earth. And, when you can find repurpose it and upcycle it, as you said, as I called it.
I absolutely love that part of it. That's just amazing. Yeah. So along the way, how long have you been doing that? 30 years?
The upcycling part has been since, we did the Kickstarter in 2013, so that's fairly recent. I've been busy, most of my career has been busy as an artist. I work independently. I've had assistants here and there, mostly other glass artists. We share helping each other. The Hudson Valley, where I live, is kind of got a number. It's really the birthplace in many ways of the American craft movement. just because the main shows were out here that everybody did. So people would even come from California, the West Coast, all the way out to the East Coast, and still do, to access the market out here for selling certain types of products, gift type things. The art market, which I kind of latched onto about mid-career, I had a little glimpse of fame by having a piece featured on the cover of Smithsonian Magazine. And that kind of boosted my image to focus more in the art world, which was really great because then I could stay independent and not have to travel so much I could sell through galleries, which is what I did for this last 15 years.
Yeah, that's cool. That's really cool. So what I'd like to do is get into, that much time in doing what you were doing, and you basically talked a little bit about it in the very beginning, and that you needed funding, and you got a chance to get the apprenticeship program going. But I'd like to hear that greatest kick in the gut moment that you had at one point, either on a personal level or on a professional level, whichever you feel like sharing.
Well, it's kind of combined for me. I have what I recently learned from a friend of mine who's an entertainment and a lawyer. He says, you have a lifestyle business. Many times artists the way to get very famous and really big name is to really turn your life over to other people. And major entertainers talk about this all the time, is that they don't really have a personal life left, really, in many ways, and they're very protective of their personal life. It's very isolated in many ways. They can't go outside and this and that. But for me, I have what's called a lifestyle business, and I really appreciated that. And that's another thing I'm very grateful for, is that early on I made the decision. I was very comfortable talking to people about what I did, marketing my own work, and I did that, and a lot of us did make that. And with the preference for a lifestyle, we could live anywhere in the country and go to shows and sell our work, make what we like, basically, and go to shows and sell it and come back with the money. And that was great. And then I guess really beginning after 9/11, the culture began to shift away from these public gatherings and people with money that were my customers. My customers were basically upper middle class to wealthy people. Began less and less to be going out, and this kind of a tone of austerity in the culture that was just starting to heal a little bit. And then 2008 came along, and the economic crunch really affected the arts in general in a lot of ways. As that's one of the kind of things that people, discretionary income becomes a lot less open for spending. The discretion is is tightened quite a bit when it comes to art purchases and collecting. So I mean, that was just the beginning, and then in 2009, my wife had a major incident where she ended up going through emergency brain surgery, and her survival was uncertain, and which was definitely a traumatic event, being helicoptered to a trauma center and the whole thing. She was really it was a surprise in the sense it wasn't an accident that happened. I just came up from the studio. I was getting to go to a show, and had the van all packed and everything, and came up to the house, and she was laying on the floor like I thought she had fallen asleep, and turns out she had had a seizure. And so I was 10 years on the local volunteer ambulance corps, so I was able to get her safely to the emergency room, and they didn't know quite what to make out of the situation. She had regained consciousness, and they thought maybe she had had a seizure based on the CT scan, but when we went to they said it could have been a stroke also, and so they sent her on. We live in a small town. It has a little local hospital, but they didn't. They weren't ready to take that situation on, so they medevaced her down to Westchester Medical Center, and turns out she had very large brain tumors that one had started to bleed a little bit that caused a seizure, and she went into emergency surgery, and fortunately everything was very successful for her, and she recovered pretty well. And then she was still recovering from that, and then that same year I went through the open heart surgery, also without previous symptoms, just I had a valve issue that needed immediate attention, so I had an open heart valve repair and a Mays procedure for atrial fibrillation. But so those were, but it was very hard on my children, and understandably so, to see both their parents all of a sudden disabled in a way. And my older daughter was 14 at the time, and shortly thereafter she was bullied in school, and at a very vulnerable time in her life, and cyberbullied over the phone, and just led to a kind of a real kick in the gut for our whole family.
Yeah, wow.
I have to say, where she couldn't go back to school, and both me and I are recovering, trying to get back on the road, earning some income, and of course the medical bills were piling up, and we did have a major catastrophic insurance with a $10,000 deductible, but as I said, we had a lifestyle business. We were not rich. That wasn't our priority to make a lot of money. Really, our priority was to live a life that we had just what we needed. We had everything we needed, but it wasn't extravagant at all. It was kind of not prepared for catastrophe by any means, but so that's what happened. We ended up having that catastrophic moment where this perfect storm of events came our way in some way, and it's been a healing journey ever since.
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as the healing process is going, what did you learn from that whole process? I mean, because I love the whole idea of the lifestyle business. Yeah, I really like that. I mean, I've met so many people. I travel quite a bit, and I've met some amazing people. And some folks travel the world, and they travel the world because they have a lifestyle business, or they may even just be the type of people like I met a young lady here. I was out skydiving, and what she does is she's been known for, she packs parachutes. So one of the things she does is she travels around the world. She'll be in New Zealand one year. She's been to 20 some odd countries, and she's only like 18 or 19. Yeah. No, she's between 19 and 21, something like that. She was young to me, and that's what she does, right? And she just lives she's been all over the place, and she lives a great lifestyle, and she hangs around with some really cool people.
I'll tell you, it's more and more a premium lifestyle, especially for the young people. It's part of what allows me to relate to young people, is that they look to me as a model in many ways, and I'm in the process of trying to create a bridge in our local community to the younger generation, the millennials, that many of whom are struggling in their creative careers, and and they see these models of young people that are billionaires by by the time they're 20, and I say, you don't need that. You don't need that to be a successful and fulfilled person. Just like what you're doing. Abundance is all around us. And it really, you learn to open yourself up to that. And this get rich quick thing, the old, it's great if it happens to you, but there are so many other opportunities in life, and in many ways more fulfilling than that.
Exactly. It's not all it's cut out to be either. And if people, there's so much rhetoric out there, and so much, just like you said, the pop stars that are making all this, millions of dollars, they don't see, what the lifestyle that they have to go through to live that. They're not as happy as they appear to be in many cases, and then they end up, that's why they end up doing drugs and end up in jail and end up doing all this other stuff. The millennials, quite frankly, based on what I've seen and talking to other amazing men on the show and off the show, is more and more millennials are more interested in collecting experiences rather than collecting stuff. And that's why they're picking up these vocations that are they're building their vocation around their lifestyle. And it makes me giggly. It really does. I just love the idea of that, and to see people do that.
That's right. And that's where the experience becomes, that's the premium. And the money comes along with it in many cases, if you really love what you're doing and find the passion to follow through with it. That I was very fortunate to get into something at a time when it was just beginning for a lot of us, and it didn't take the skill level that you could kind of learn as you went along. But what's happening these days, what I'm seeing, is that the tools for creativity have really come down to earth in many ways to be on your tabletop, right on your desktop, right in front of you. You know, these incredible tools have become available for so many people that it opens up another world of creativity, and that's it's new. It's somewhat new to me, because my approach, along with many of us, was very traditional. In fact, my lifestyle. You look at what I call a lifestyle. Here, for me, I could have been like Paul Revere, living in early American days. I mean, that's what they did. They had the house in the front and the workshop behind, or the other way around. The workshop was up front and they lived behind, or they lived over that workshop. And where in you go into other countries, and that in China when we visited, they were still doing things that way. But it seems so backward here. But really, there's a lot to be said for scaling your life, keeping a hold of the scale of your life, so that you meet your needs and you see a way forward, but you stay open to the possibilities that life has to bring you, and the priorities have definitely, it seems, shifted after the abuses of our economy. What people went through. I mean, I was just talking with my brother. It happens to be his birthday, and he was a big wig in the music business. Sony Records, VP, and the whole thing. And all of a sudden, that music business just changed totally, and he has had tremendous adaptation to go through. And now he's doing home health care. It's a completely different thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, happy birthday to your brother.
Yeah, he'll enjoy it when he hears the podcast that I mentioned to him, because he's awesome. And it's been a struggle, but he's being successful, and he's been a real support and role model for me in many ways of what, because he was always the business mind. I was fortunate. I never, we didn't have to sell anything. People came to us, and how can you go wrong with meeting the person who made something that you really love, that you really like, and are willing to pay, my bigger pieces were quite expensive, and there were people that just, saw the value in that, and it's something you can't do on the internet, but we're coming as close as you can get with it right now, but you can't just, you just don't get that on the internet, and the internet is another thing that happened to what I did, was that more and more younger people said, well, I don't need to go to a craft show and beat the crowd and be outside, and you never know what's going to happen, and when I can shop on Etsy and see all kinds of stuff in my whenever I want to, my pajamas at home.
Yeah, and usually whenever I end up buying something like that, it's usually because I know the backstory, and so that's why I always look for the backstory for certain things, especially when it comes to arts and crafts and those type of things, the arts.
Yeah, the story has become much more important to what I do, and I'm really emphasizing that in all my communications, is to learn how to tell the story in different ways. So it's easy when you're face to face with somebody and they ask you, you're surrounded by your work, and they come into the booth, and of course they're already intrigued because they walked into your booth, and it's a great opening. And it really has everything going to tell that story. Then people are curious, particularly about glass, because it has such a mystery to it as like how it's made, and I didn't know you could do that in your backyard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's still, unless you've seen it being done on a small scale, close up, it's pretty incredible. There's many videos online about it and on the television now, but just because it's such an attractive and a beautiful process, I tell you, I was hypnotized by it. That's how I got into it. It became my addiction for a while. I couldn't get enough of it, and this magical material that is alive, right, and responds. It's like a conversation with the material. Sometimes it takes over, and sometimes you take over, and something comes out of it in the end, and it has this wonderful, wonderful responsiveness to it and spontaneity.
So we're at the point where we're going to pay it forward here, Gary, but even before we do that, just briefly, just in case there's anybody out there who's as intrigued as I am and really wants to kind of get into it, and even as a hobby and try to, what would you recommend to that person that wants to get into glass blowing or working with glass?
Well, right now, the real growing side of what I was doing in glass making, the scale of glass making, which began in the garage, is now in what's called a public access studio, and that's a real growing thing across the country, just because it's usually a team activity. I was one of the few people that did a lot on my own, but mostly it's done with 2, 3, 4 people, and it's a great way to work together and learn together, so you can take turns doing various parts of the process. And those public access studios are all over the country. You just look up and you'll find something in most urban areas, the cities for sure. And I think even on Hawaii there's one. I know there's a few good galleries there. And usually where there's glass being sold, these access studios are not too far away. So, and also there's another quite popular form of glass making, which is called flame working, or it's done with a torch, and it's become very, very popular with the the young people, because there's a built-in market making marijuana pipes. And in the places where it's legal, they can earn a living doing it. So it's become very popular doing that. And it's my good buddy Paul Stankert is one of the best in the world at that style of glass making, and he's written several excellent books trying to convince that world that there's an art side to and a very creative side to what they're doing, and to not limit themselves to one kind of product. But it's certainly a much more accessible way to work with glass and to make jewelry, beads, smaller type items. Paperweights is called flame working, and that you can get a setup to work in a small space for under $1,000. Where glass blowing on a large scale, it's tens of thousands of dollars to set up a studio now.
Wow!
So learning through schools, there's many university programs now where there weren't when I was coming up. A lot of the art schools have a glass program that if you wanted to pay to take courses, and these, like where I am, Corning, New York has a big program for teaching. In Brooklyn, New York, believe it or not, there's a urban glass, which is done in a large studio just over the Brooklyn Bridge. And in South Jersey, there's another one. I don't know the name of it. Philadelphia, I've worked in, but basically they're urban areas. I know in Chicago there's a brand new one that just let people look up on the internet, glass blowing, and you'll find these public access studios where you can take classes, and then when you get some skills, you can rent time at the furnace, so you don't have the overhead of having your own equipment, which can be considerable.
Oh yeah, that's perfect right there. So. Yeah. We're going to pay it forward now, and what I would like for you to do is to give Men of Abundance 1 to 3 actionable steps that they can take today.
Actionable steps. Open every morning to the abundance within. I've more and more, that's been a feature of my day. And from that, I've been able to find a new sense of who I am that is ready to include others in a community sense, to build a new community. And that's one of my recent strongest engagements, is to build a creative community in my area, because so often that people get that side of things gets too fractured, and it's all, if it's not about money, then nobody comes together. But really, that it's tremendously rewarding for me at this time of my life to make that bridge and be a mentor to younger people that are engaged in all kinds of different creative endeavors, and to share the good fortune that I've had in my life to have been able to do something that I really love to do, and become a mentor to inspire others to really reach for that in their life, because the culture that we live in can be very deadening, and it's not getting any better in my mind. It really needs new vision, and a vision that comes from a resource within and connected with something more deeply inside is where real action comes from.
Excellent.
I don't want to add any more to that. I'll get too wordy.
What daily habits make up the biggest impact in your life?
Well, other than what I said, is I sit every morning, and I'm not a follower of any particular religion at this point in my life, but for me, that's my temple, my church. It's become, I don't like to say it's a habit. It's something I do every day, but I do it intentionally. It puts all my other habits, which I certainly have, in a different light, and allows me to see the open spaces in my life, in my day, at the same time as I live a very habitual life. Because there are open spaces where is time to reconnect with myself and reconnect with the abundance that is all around us, that embraces us in every moment, if we can be open to it.
And that's beautiful. I absolutely love that. And one point I want to make from that is that you said you wouldn't consider it a habit. And that's the beautiful thing about habits, is once you've done them for long enough, they just simply become who you are and
that's
what
right.
you do.
That's great.
So
that's a great phrase.
That.
Yeah,
that's beautiful.
Yeah.
So what book would you recommend to our abundant leaders, and why?
Well, I just finished a book called Simple Truths by Kent Nurburn, and I'm eagerly awaiting his next book, The Girl Who Sang to the Buffalo. He is a writer from Michigan, and he's deeply into Native American imagery, but I just find him a very inspiring person to read, and I highly recommend all of his books. He has taken, he's kind of channeled in many ways, and I have several friends who are into the Native American life, or the religious part of it at least, and they say, "Oh, he's another white guy, trying to be an Indian, or indigenous," and it's not that. He really has I believe, a spiritual connection to what the original Americans, the indigenous population, how they saw the planet, their relationships with other people, with their family, and with their community, and how that can be a glue to hold us to who we are, and to know who we are, and to know that we're loved by this greater power in our life, this greater intelligence, finer intelligence. He's got that, and it comes through in his writing. And the book's Simple Truth is just a little, like, I had it in the bathroom kind of book, and because it's little phrases, each page has a different thing. But he writes these novels, and I'm eagerly awaiting. Kent Nurburn.
Okay, beautiful. I will have that listed in the show notes of this show as well, along with timestamps, which are really cool. in the show notes, you'll see little timestamps, and you click on the timestamp, and it'll take you directly to that point of interest within the podcast, which is really neat to
have good.
That have that technology there. It's really neat. So my final question to you, Gary, is one of my favorite questions to ask everybody, which is, what does living a life of abundance mean to you?
Living now, in the now, whenever possible. What I have found is that with emphasis on being in the present, that there is an organic response, and that organic response is abundance. That we are filled. If we truly open ourselves, we are filled with what God meant for us. It takes a while. It's taken me my lifetime to really find what real openness is, but I have seen that as a new authority in my life. That it is, and I recognize it as an organic birthright for every human being. And if we can touch that on a regular basis, the world would be a hell of a lot better place.
Absolutely, 100% agree. Absolutely. So we're going to close this up. Gary, it's been a beautiful conversation. I appreciate the stories, and I appreciate you sharing that information with Men of Abundance. How else can we reach you? And let's make sure we have that website so we can go check out your work.
Yeah, Genetti Glass is my website. I do have my Upcycled. I just launched one of my Upcycled glass products on Amazon, so you can search junkyard glass and you'll come up with Amazon, who is attempting to rule the retail world, but they do have a new area that's called Amazon Launchpad, and it's all curated products that have been crowdfunded. So that's one of the things that came out of my crowdfunding campaign success, was that Amazon reached out to me and offered me all this content. There's a little video on there. A lot of the backstory that we've talked about the product, and I'll be adding more content as time goes along. But that's a good way to approach and to see what the Upcycled Glass project is about, and maybe even purchase something if you feel so inclined.
Absolutely, yeah, most definitely. And I actually just heard about that new Amazon new Amazon product that they just pushed out. I just heard about that this morning.
Yeah. No, there's some wonderful things on it. It's a great, and they're really eager to connect with that population that for these new products, new kinds of things with new ideas, and a lot of it's gadgets. But so I'm kind of a standout in that sense, but with what I'm doing. But it's like I said, it's really about the story and the integrity of the approach to making things. I mean, the maker movement is the next step for me. It's the next phase of the American craft movement, is this maker movement, and it's including all the new technologies and the new way of making things and disrupting old patterns, and that's where I'm headed with it. And I think that Amazon is intrigued by it enough to reach out to us to try to help us. So that's good.
Yeah, it is. Well, Men of Abundance, I'll tell you've got the story. You've now met the man, virtually anyway, through the podcast, and now you just have to go look at his work. It's amazing, and I'm sure many of you are going to want to pick up a couple pieces. So, Gary, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate this conversation, and I look forward to you going out and checking out some more of your work.
Thank you so much, Wally.
Awesome. Have a good day.
You too. Take care.
All right, Men of Abundance, I'm glad you stuck around to the end. I know that was a long one, but it was a really, really cool story, and I just had to share that with you. Now, go out and live your life of abundance, and make sure to pay it forward.
That's all for today, Abundance Leaders. For more about our guests and the powerful information we shared with you today, be sure to sign up for our mailing list at menofabundance.com. We appreciate your time and look forward to hanging out with you on our next episode. So until then, be sure to pay it forward and live your life of abundance.